All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to try and unravel one of the biggest and honestly most mysterious stories in all of European history, the origin and the rise of the Slavs. I mean, just try to imagine a people who, in what felt like the blink of an eye, went from being basically a footnote in old Roman records to dominating half the continent. They completely redrew the map of Europe.
You see this quote from the amazing archaeologist Maria Gimbutas, and it paints this incredible picture, right? It's so cinematic. It gives you this image of a single people, kind of held back for centuries, and then suddenly, boom, the floodgates open and they pour out to claim a continent. And yeah, this is pretty much the storybook version most of us have in our heads. It's simple, it's dramatic, it's compelling, and, it seems to explain how all these countries, from Poland all the way down to Bulgaria, came to be. But what if that whole story, as neat and tidy as it is built on some really shaky ground? What if the whole hunt for one single ancient Slavic homeland is actually asking the wrong question from the very start? That's the real mystery we're diving into. So, here's the heart of the problem. For a people who made such a massive impact, the early Slavs left behind zero written records of their own. Nothing. No sagas, no chronicles, no stories about where they came from written by them during that early period. It means historians and archaeologists basically have to become detectives, just piecing together clues left behind by everybody else. And get this, the very first time we even see the word Slav in writing isn't until the 6th century, and it comes from outsiders, the Byzantines. To them, these Sclaveni, as they called them, were this new and often pretty troublesome group of people showing up on their northern border along the Danube River. And that's a really crucial point. For a long time, Slav wasn't what they called themselves, it's what their neighbors called them. And that brings us to this really powerful, kind of mind-bending idea from the historian Dr. Florin Kurta. His point is that trying to find some proto-Slav identity way back in the Bronze Age, well, it's like trying to find Americans on the Mayflower. The identity of being Slavic wasn't this ancient, frozen thing. It was something that was forged and created during the whole process of moving and settling.
Okay, so even if the identity was new, the people and their language had to come from somewhere, right? So let's reframe the question. Instead of who were they, let's ask where did they come from? And to do that, historians have 3 main types of clues to work with. All right, clue number 1 is language. What linguists have done is pretty clever. They looked at the core vocabulary that all Slavic languages share. Words for specific trees like beech or for swamps and lakes. It's like they're reverse engineering a location, asking, okay, where on earth do all these things exist in one place? And the general consensus points to the Pripet marshes, this huge wetland area right on the border of modern Ukraine and Belarus. But, and this is a huge but, there's a problem. Language can suggest a where, but without any early writing, it's almost impossible to say when. Were Slavic speakers living there 500 years before they expanded, or was it 1,500 years? The words themselves just can't tell us.
Our second clue comes from modern science. Let's talk genetics. Studies of Y-DNA have found a couple of genetic markers or haplogroups called R1A and I2 that are incredibly common among people who speak Slavic languages today. This points to some kind of shared ancestry. And then a major study that just came out in 2023 really hammered this home. It found that the Slavic migrations were a huge demographic event, contributing more than half the ancestry of most people in the Balkans today. So this is powerful evidence that this wasn't just an idea spreading, this was a massive movement of actual people. And our final clue is what other people were writing down at the time. So, way back in the first couple of centuries, Roman writers talk about a group called the Venedi living over in the area of modern Poland. Okay, now fast forward a few hundred years, and the Byzantines are busy dealing with the Sclaveni and the Entes down on the Danube. And the key that links them all together comes from a 6th century historian named Jordanes. He just straight up says that all 3 of these groups, the Venedi, the Entes, and the Sclaveni, all came from the same root. And suddenly these different names start looking like part of one big story. So, okay, the evidence is piling up. A huge movement of people who spoke a similar language and shared some common ancestry. But how did this expansion actually happen? I mean, historians point out that it was more profound and more lasting than even a lot of the famous Germanic migrations. So, what was their secret? This brings us to a really fascinating debate among academics, and it really boils down to 2 competing ideas. On one hand, you have the simple migration model.
A massive wave of farmers just poured into lands that were left empty after the Roman Empire started to crumble. Then you have the processual model, which is a bit more nuanced. It suggests it wasn't just people moving, but that a language and a culture spread, kind of like a ripple effect, and were adopted by the local people already living there.
Now, to really get that second theory, we need to understand this one word, a coin. It's basically when a bunch of different but related dialects kind of mix together and form a simplified common language, a lingua franca, that lets all these different groups talk to each other easily. And some scholars think that's exactly what early Slavic might have been. So how does a language spread that fast? Well, one really compelling theory points to a group called the Avars. They were a powerful nomadic empire that controlled a huge chunk of Central Europe. Now, the Avars themselves were not Slavic, but they ruled over tons of Slavic-speaking groups. It's entirely possible that the Avar elites adopted this Slavic Koine just as a practical language to run their big multi-ethnic empire. And if they did that, well, that would have been like pouring gasoline on a fire, helping the language just explode across the region. So whether it was mass migration, the spread of a language, or, more likely, a combination of both, the result was just undeniable. A whole new Slavic-speaking world emerged. And from this massive cultural zone, new political powers started to take shape. And the result of this whole expansion was a new, much more diverse landscape. This world that seemed kind of unified at first starts to fracture into three major branches. You've got the West Slavs, the East Slavs, and the South Slavs. And inside each of those branches, you get all these distinct tribes, like the Polans, who would become the core of Poland, the Drevlians in the forests of Ukraine, and of course the Serbs and Croats who settled down in the Balkans. Over the next couple of centuries, these loose groups of tribes started to organize and form powerful states. Down in the Balkans, Slavic tribes actually teamed up with the Bulgars to create a huge empire. In the Alps, you get the Carantanians, who create the first Slavic principality. And by the 9th century, things are really taking off, with huge powers like Great Moravia and the Kievan Rus dominating the map of Eastern Europe. And here's a really crucial step in this whole process. They started to write down laws. The most famous example is probably the Ruskaya Pravda, or Rush Justice, from Kievan Rus. This is a huge deal. It's the moment you stop being just a collection of tribes with unwritten customs and become a formal state with centralized power and laws that apply to everyone. So when you step back and look at the whole picture, the Slavic expansion wasn't just some historical footnote from the Dark Ages. It was a foundational event. It permanently changed the ethnic, the linguistic, and the political map of the entire continent. It created this whole new center of gravity in the East that fundamentally changed what it even meant to be European. Which leaves us with this final, really fundamental question that the story of the Slavs just forces you to think about. What actually defines a people? Is it about having shared DNA that stretches back for thousands of years? Is it about speaking the same language? Or is identity something else entirely? Something that's created in a moment, an idea that takes hold and brings people together. The Slavic mystery is just a powerful reminder that the past is never as simple as the stories we like to tell.